So nice to see you. I was telling the class that I was so excited to have you here. So thank you so much.
No pressure. So okay.
No pressure at all.
Right.
Well, what I'm going to do is introduce Dan, and these guys know because we've done this a few times. We want to hear a little bit from you, just a couple minutes. You can tell us, some highlights of your career and related to food service if you want to or not. And then they have prepared questions to ask you. So they all raise their hands over Zoom, and I just call on them and they'll ask you questions. So they have usually have great questions, and you learn a lot from our guests. So thank you again. To officially introduce you, Dan is the Director of Department of Nutrition and Food Services at the University of California, San Francisco, or UCSF Health System, where he is responsible for patient meal services at 3 hospitals totaling 817 beds, 7 retail food operations, and a combined sales of $12 million, catering and conference services with an annual sales of $3 million, 3 gift shops with an annual sales of $2 million. Wow, those gift shops.
I think I need to update my gift shops. I got 5 now.
Oh, wow. Okay. 5 gift shops with annual sales of $2 million, plus oversight of all inpatient and outpatient nutrition services. He's overseeing the creation of renovation of all retail food outlets at UCSF and oversees other non-traditional programs such as digital signage, interactive patient experience system, and a fleet of, oh my goodness, so cool. Hopefully you can tell us about it. 33 robots.
I'll show you those.
I love that. In addition to these responsibilities, he serves as the health system sustainability officer. Though volumes are down during the pandemic, Dan and the team have remained very busy by reopening a hospital, building a kitchen, planning for 2 new hospitals and medical office building, constructed several drive-through testing clinics, and launched a mobile ordering solution, as well as keeping the team focused on dealing with the challenges of the day. And amidst all of this, you had time to join us. Dan, I thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you guys very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I love doing these kinds of things. So I'll talk a little bit about myself. I'll talk about my operations. We'll take a pause, do your questions, and then we'll go into some fun food safety stuff. And share some stuff that we're doing. I also threw some interesting stuff in there about sustainability that we're doing, which wasn't quite on Michelle's list, but it's kind of a way out of the box thing that we're looking at. So that's kind of what I was going to do this morning. So this is me. I'll get into some of those details. Midwestern, born and raised, and but I've lived all over Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, Pennsylvania, Texas, and then out here in California. So I'm a Midwesterner out in California, I guess. And so my career began here. It's kind of an old school Dairy Queen-like thing. It's unique to St. Louis, Missouri. It's frozen custard. So it's really thick and creamy. And I worked at this place called Ted Drew's. There's actually someone named that. And I worked there a lot. Like from 16 to 22. I worked there when I was doing my dietetic internship. So I did my internship in St. Louis. But I learned a lot about the food industry. I learned a lot about the basics, building teams, systems, standardization, and a lot there. From there, I went to Bradley University. It's a small school about 5,000, Peoria, Illinois. And, kind of wasn't sure what to do, and then finally made a decision to be a home ec major. You can imagine how that went over as the only guy in the whole program, but the grief I got from my friends and fraternity brothers was pretty insane. But worked my way up and then took a detour to Penn State. I did an internship through the National Association of College University Food Services. It was really very much a cementing experience that I really, this is what I wanted to do some way, shape, or form, but really saw, what a big time, dining program could be. Went to St. John's, just SIU, worked there as a grad student, and then did my internship, which for me was the third. It's pretty unique, and that was a third management, a third clinical, and a third community. Most programs are very heavy clinical. Not only close to a third of the experience was there. St. John's was pretty cool. You know, again, I learned some things and say, you know, again, this is sort of really re-cementing. And then the importance of mentoring. Ironically, the director of the program now is the head of the National Food Buying Program that I use right now here at UCSF. And so Bridget and I have really known each other for a long, long, long time, and just keeping in touch with people. So Bradley, it was about middle between St. Louis and Peoria, and or Chicago, I should say. And so I wanted to go live in Chicago with my friends, and took my first job at North Shore University Health System, which is right along Lake Michigan. It's literally next to Northwestern University. In fact, I would park my car at the stadium and then take a shuttle to the hospital. It was that close to things. But I was a clinical dietitian. I knew I didn't want to be a clinical dietitian, but I did want to practice, and I wanted to do that as soon as I could out of my program. But I really wanted to go someplace bigger, and for me that was Rush University Medical Center. Rush is a very large facility. It's got next to another couple of hospitals in the Illinois Medical District right on the west side of Chicago. It's about 3 blocks away from the United Center, where the Blackhawks and the Bulls play, and really got a chance to start at the entry level, cut my teeth, and then work my way up, and then really learned a lot about engagement and how you connect with people. And when you want to build things and move things, particularly in people-oriented businesses, and connecting and engaging with them is really what makes it tick. I learned a whole lot more about unions, but learned also a phenomenal amount about systems, because there was a patient kitchen, there was a retail kitchen, and then there was a dining club / conference center kitchen. 3 kitchens, 3 buildings, over 5 city square blocks. I was sending food to a patient care unit 4 blocks away. So we would go from the basement in one building up to the 4th floor, across 2 skywalks, and people were literally pushing and pulling carts over there 3 times a day, every day. And these were not small carts, and these were with old school metal pallets. So for those of you who've worked in hospitals, you know there's usually kind of an underliner of some kind. Most of them now are what we call induction. They go through a thermomagnetic activation process. These were old school. These were wax pellets that were heated up to a couple hundred degrees, and you had to use this sort of suction cup to basically take them and put them onto the tray. And the number of burns I got because of them was pretty insane. But learned a lot there, and really wanted to. I told the director when I was there as an entry-level supervisor, I wanted her job when she was done with it. So Rush is an academic medical center, but it's also a university. It's no undergrads, it's health sciences only. And at the time, the director of the program on the ops side was also the chair of the Department of Clinical Nutrition on the College of Health Sciences on the university side. And I thought that was so super cool to be and had 1 foot in academia and 1 foot in operations, grounded in reality. No ivory tower academics for me, and really did want to go take her job when she was done with it. So I went to Iowa State to get a PhD. So my career took a turn. My boss there was the department chair. She was the associate director at Rush, and she became the chair of the program there. And so she reached out to me, and I'm like, well, if I'm going to go do this PhD thing, then I need to take a shot. And so it's a long story on the whole PhD thing, because it's not behind my name. But I did learn a lot about teaching, and really leveraging that operations experience, and sort of created a job for myself. I went there on 1-year deal, teaching in a teaching restaurant, and then working on some grants. And these grants were going to run out, so I said I better get myself some money. So I wrote some grants with some professors, and we got it. So I got $1 million in 1 year, $2.5 million grants, and by the time I was done, got about $3 million. And I wasn't even a tenure track professor. So learned a lot about those, and still had that love of that. And then from there, took a little bit of a journey to the University of Houston as a professor for a year, and then now we're at UCSF Health. So this is actually a picture of UCSF. This is the top of a mountain. This is Mount Sutro, and the hospital is actually down here, these 2 buildings, but then there's buildings built up all around it. And so it's part of the University of California. I believe Cal Poly is part of CSU. We're part of UC. And so we're on par with the other 10 campuses and the other 5 health systems. We're, I think, number 8 in the country from US News and World Report. and have kind of a small, a medium, and a large. The Parnassus Heights campus is the one that's over here. In the picture, this is the large, and the Mission Bay one is the new, and then the Mount Zion one was a hospital, stopped being a hospital, and we opened Mission Bay, and now it's back to being a hospital again in the middle of the pandemic. This is the San Francisco Peninsula. Golden Gate Bridge is right up here on the north. You got the Bay Bridge over here. And so the three squares are the three principal clinical campuses. So my office is over here on number 1, but I do regularly float to the other campuses because I have a fair amount going on there. So it's a lot of square footage. It's a lot of people that make things interesting. And this is sort of the totality of what we're doing. And some of that was in the bio. And like I said, I need to update my slides. I do now have a 4th gift shop at on the East Bay, and then we also have a children's hospital in the West Bay. Right now, I don't have any responsibilities for that until last week when I picked up the 5th gift shop that's over there. Catering has been decimated. We have policies, as I'm sure you guys do, that have influenced that. For example, you're all doing this distance. We have no students on campus as either. Ironically, UCSF is a lot like that place I talked about in Chicago called Rush. The UCSF is an allied health sciences university. There are no undergraduates. There are only graduates, residents, fellows, postdocs, etc. And so conceptually, the group is very much the same. So I have kind of 3 divisions. Things either fall into my food service division, which I have 3 lines of business: my patient dining program, my retail, and my catering. And then I also oversee dietitians. We have 50 dietitians on staff. We have about 10, including myself, in operations, and we have another 40 in our inpatient or outpatient and across the Bay Area, not just at those 3 core campuses. The inpatient team does probably what you think in terms of working with physicians, nurses, other professionals, looking at patients. The thing that's unique for us is we're what's called a tertiary quaternary medical center, which sort of means we get the sickest of the sick. There's actually ways to measure how sick patients are in a hospital. So to compare an academic medical center versus a community medical center, and the measure is called the case mix index. Then the higher it is, in our case, we're about 2.3, which is really, really high. It basically denotes sort of that we have people that are truly sick, and if they can get care in the community, they would, but they come to us when the care in the community isn't enough. And so we do things like transplants and stuff like that that are very high acuity are there. Our outpatient teams also work throughout. Just like you guys are on Zoom today, a lot of my dietitians are seeing patients via Zoom now because they don't want to come in, or again, they are at risk. Many of them very much have chronic health conditions, so it puts them at higher risk for contracting COVID. So to still keep in touch with patients is important, and so we're doing a lot of that via telehealth. A couple of quick things that are unique about UCSF. I am dining services for the university, as well as being within the hospital. So we don't have a traditional meal program. My team, we put in a declining balance program that serves the entire university. Works a little bit more like a toll tag. You fund it, and then you put money on, and then you are allowed to spend it using your university ID badge at our campus. Give you some pictures of, this is our Mission Bay campuses. This is newer. It's basically 3 hospitals in one. We have our children's hospital down here. We have our women's and cancer hospital in this building. And then we have a medical office and support buildings all right here. Basically right over here is the home of the Golden State Warriors. It's literally across the street. Admittedly, we've only had 1 season in the place, but it is literally across the street. 2 blocks north of the Chase Center, where the Warriors play, is AT&T Park, where the San Francisco Giants play. So I got a good deal on my parking pass. I can go up there and do what I need to do and not pay $40 for parking for those types of things. This is a pretty cool campus in the sense that we've got drop-off locations here, and then we're building up some stuff here on the plaza. There's a little amphitheater, but again, trying to make a very nice, inviting, attractive. You see a nice photovoltaic panels on the roof there to be nice and sustainable. So this is one of our campuses. this is a top-down one of the one I showed you in the picture. And so the blue is the hospital right here. And then we have an outpatient building also in the blue across the street. And then we have these academic buildings all over the place. I have competitors on campus. So we have a student union right here. And so I have nothing to do with those operations. So people can literally take their food dollar and walk across the street and patronize the vendors here. In addition, they pay San Francisco living wage, which is just over $15 an hour. Right now, I believe it's $15.69. I pay union wages and benefits. I pay $25 an hour off the street. I pay another 42% of that for benefits. And again, it's pretty generous UC benefits for those who are at least 50% and as an appointment and above. So the interesting thing about this campus here is this was what we'll call greenfield. That means there was nothing here. Whatever was here, we knocked down and we started with a really flat surface. This building, my next project that we're working on, this red square, we have a small psychiatric hospital that's next to the main hospital campus. We're gonna knock that down and we're gonna build a 16-story hospital. So these are two 15-story buildings that are connected. And this 16-story building will be connected right here. And so we'll have 3 hospital towers, but we have to keep these 2 hospitals running while we're building this one. This is going to be almost 1 million square feet when we build the tower on this campus. And I got to figure out how to feed people in the middle of construction. This is a 10-year project. I've been at UCSF 14 years. When I came in 2006, I signed off on the space for my department in this building, and then it opened up in 2015. So it'll be interesting to see how this one evolves over time. I'm going to get 2 kitchens out of it, and we're going to have a whole lot of other cool things that are happening. We're hurting right now for business, in part because of the pandemic. A lot of students, all of our students, are not on campus, and there's a lot of people working from home. And at this campus, we would get a lot of business from people feeding into from these other buildings to walk across the street and patronize us. Give you a couple of pictures. This is the Moffat Cafe. This is our main cafe experience. It's a pretty traditional scramble system where people can come in and get what they need and go on through a series of cashiers. We built a convenience store here. This is right off an elevator lobby. This used to be a trash room. And I wish I could show you a cool picture. I kind of turned trash into cash. So imagine when you go to the dining hall and you put your tray on a tray raider, that was what was in this room. And so I took the square footage and I made it into a convenience store. For those of you West Coast, Pete's Coffee is our bread and butter on there, liquid gold as I like to call it. And we keep this open from 5:30 in the morning to midnight, basically every day. And so I can open this up early, keep this open late, and not have to keep the cafe open, which is about 15,000 square feet, all in, including our 360-seat dining. So this is a top-down view. So the store is right here, and then we've created deli stations, dining room, grill, a chef table with some flexible concepts and pop-up concepts there that all, again, probably very typical to what you have in your dining hall. But again, I'm dining services in addition to serving the cafe. So I don't know, Michelle, if you want to take a pause there and
Awesome.
take questions.
Information. I love the trash into cash. Well, I mean, it's up to you. How many more slides do you have? We're going to cover sustainability, so I don't think it's not that off track.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to share a little bit about what we're doing at the University of California, because it's kind of something we're very proud of. As Michelle mentioned, I am the sustainability officer, which means I sort of facilitate getting everything about sustainability, including my day job. So we have basically have had a way at UC where we measure, we basically categorize things as sustainable based on the third-party criteria. And you can see sort of how we, UCSF on the right and UC in aggregate, have gone. I believe CSU has gone to more of a real food concept, and we've actually moved away from this a little bit to ASHI stars. The thing that we're excited about doing, that we're initial signatories in what's called the Cool Food Pledge, coolfood.org. So this is an effort started by the World Resources Institute, which is a nonprofit out of Washington, D.C. So imagine for the moment, you guys could estimate the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from the food that you have in your pantry at home. We're trying to do this on a large scale for a large university and health dining program. And so we've come up with some science-based ways using WR's work to say we have lots of life cycle chain analysis studies that can say a pound of ground beef or a kilo of ground beef equals on average this amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And they've done that for pretty much all commodity food programs. So we need to make the world a cooler place. And in order to meet the Paris Agreement, whether the US government is or is not fully in on it, we have to be better. So while food is actually considered, is within scope 3 emissions, we still are trying to see if there's ways that we can in fact be more plant forward. So we embarked on the Cool Food project and really had to revitalize our information systems to see how we can take all of our data and convert that into weights first and foremost, and then secondly, use the factors to do the calculations. And so here's what we've done, and we've been doing this for 4 years. So we've actually been able to achieve some pretty good results. So by basically saying, you know, something by weight might lead a lot more greenhouse gas emissions, and beef and lamb are certainly at the top of the list. So when we look at our food purchases by weight, and these are on a fiscal year for us, we've actually been able to decrease the amount of food we've bought, although I would say that the FY20 data had a little bit of help from the pandemic. So when we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, we're talking about them being reduced independent of growth. So no matter how many more people we have on the planet, we still need to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to increase the planet's temperature. And so we have to do the same thing on the food side. It doesn't matter how many more students we have or how many more customers we have, we still have to in fact have a net reduction overall. So the food purchase by weight isn't what's important, it's the greenhouse gas emissions that are derived from there. And so if you look at the mix of there, you can see the red, again, the highest percentage, and from the ruminant meats, beef, lamb, and goat. We've actually been able to decrease those quite consistently over a 4-year time period. And so we're tracking pretty closely to how we would need to to do that. When we look at things from a calorie perspective, again, there's not a lot of difference over time, but we have been able to slowly shrink the percentage of beef, even if by calories it hasn't gone down a whole lot. When you look at it in terms of an actual reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and again, we're trying to go by 25% to the year 2030. So we're basically at about halfway of our goal towards that end. When we look at things that are normalized from a caloric perspective, we're trending down, but we had a little bit of a bump there. So while the net reduction is great and positive, it means that there's still some opportunities to be better as we look at things over time. And then we're looking at things as well on a meal equivalency basis. So how do you compare a dining hall, which maybe has trays or swipes, with a retail food outlet that just sells coffee and chips and other little side items? So we have some ways that we're doing what's called a meal equivalence factor. And so when we standardize things by meal equivalence, we've actually been able to show a pretty big net reduction. And well, that's pretty cool. I still have people who operate my 3 campuses. And so I've got to basically show them how they are doing in order to help move the needle. So that goes a lot towards what's the way that we're engaging, what's the ways that we're standardizing and doing that. It would be no different in Cal Poly. Again, you've got probably multiple dining halls on campus. So how does that team keep things moving in a certain direction despite having different patient populations? And so where are our opportunities? So one of the things that we're really proud of, we've been serving a blended burger since 2017. I don't know if you have a blend at Cal Poly. For us, that's 30% mushrooms and 70% ground beef. And we did that in 2017, and we did it for patients, we did it for catering, and we did it for retail. And so that's wonderful. However, my blend is still my top beef purchase. So the success of a really good product is great, and we've been able to reduce net by 30%, but it does make it a little bit more interesting on where we're able to go from here. We do have some things in the works to do the next two, because they are also beef. But the interesting one is cheese. Dairy is going to be really, really hard to reduce, and I think this is pretty true. We're part of a group called the Menus of Change, which is led by the CIA, and they have a university research consortium, and myself and my team have been a legacy member since the beginning of that group. In fact, the last time I saw Michelle was at an MC4C meeting in Hyde Park, New York, at least in person. And so this is going to be an interesting thing when you think about where cheese is used and how it's used to supplement certain products like pizza, salads, other things, how we're going to be able to get those down. So this is sort of a work in progress. Again, the emissions contributing factors, again, very low on percentage of pounds, but very high on the greenhouse gas emissions overall. When we looked at our dairy, we went up a bit in ice cream in terms of just the change of percentage. So I know this is probably very boring to you guys because it's just a lot of data that I'm throwing at you, but being able to synthesize some of this data in a very large scale operation is a trait that you guys should be working on. One of the things that is going to be needed in the future is the ability to rapidly synthesize data to get it to this point, but then also to be able to take it to the next level. So again, I mentioned our blend, that's been great, but now I've got to figure out a different way in order to get my numbers down. So I'm going to take a pause there and take questions before we go talk a little bit more about food safety.
I think you bringing in this point is such a great reminder. We talk about food service, and a lot of dietetic students are always like, "Oh, food service," but what Dan is doing is beyond food service, right? He's able to pull in these key components around nutrition and sustainability. He's able to track and synthesize data, as he said. I mean, it still is able to sort of lean into some of what people go into nutrition and dietetics to begin with. So it's not just about getting food out safely, but of course he has to think about that too. All right, so we are gonna go ahead and look at whose hands are up. We can start with Taylor.
Ooh, lots of hands. There we go.
Yeah, they go right at it. Taylor, you want to start us off?
Sure. So you're mentioning that you are swapping out plant-based versions of food for the more for the animal products to lower greenhouse gas emissions. Are there ways that you've used behavioral science in order to better promote these items and to make sure the residents receive them positively and are willing to accept those swaps?
Yeah, I still believe in the adage that people eat with their eyes. So I think great visual presentation is the starting point, because if it looks great, then you're willing to taste it. And then things kind of go from there. One of the big differences, between us in more of the healthcare space compared to college university, I don't know the dining program at Cal Poly in terms of how it's constructed, but most of them are an all you care to eat. You go and you swipe your card. And so there's very little risk to trying a new plant-based food. I don't have that luxury. I'm a la carte. You literally pay for everything. The other thing that overlays in there is that I still am serving people in a hospital. So while there's some very positive moments in a hospital, say the arrival of a child, there are also some not so happy moments in there, whether it's for the patients or the families. And so there are some things about stress eating that we don't take away all of the unhealthy. We try to balance that off. One of the core tenets of what we believe in is what I'll call food and nutrition transparency, meaning that I want to tell my customers as much about the food as I possibly can. So we actually nutritionally analyze everything. It goes on our digital boards at the point of purchase when they're making a decision, but it also goes on receipts. Not that many people take receipts, but I actually tell you On your receipt, I itemize every single item for calories, fat, carbs, and milligrams of sodium per serving. I total it up for you, and I tell you what percentage of a 2,000 or 2,500 calorie diet you just bought if you consumed 100% of that. So we've also done some other things at the point of purchase. We've put our foods in with MyFitnessPal. I've got some SKUs in there, so you can scan our barcodes and suck them into MyFitnessPal. We don't. So it's a long way of answering your question. We don't have the ability to maybe be as creative as maybe college university dining halls are, but we are still attempting to do that. And so we do a little bit we downplay the word vegetarian quite a bit. We don't label anything as vegan or vegetarian. Now we have an icon program and we do it that way, but when we put those items on our menus, we just say, this is a harvest lasagna. We don't say that it's a vegetarian lasagna. And so we're looking at creative use of words. There's also been some research done out of Stanford that's looked at just spicing up how you call vegetables, which is something usually pretty boring and mundane. Can that in fact drive sales? So we've actually started some research projects looking at just by changing the names, does that actually increase sales? But we're also looking at on the patient side. So if you've never been in a hospital, you don't pay for the food that you received as a patient. It's sort of like when you go to a hotel, you don't directly pay for the housekeeper. I don't get any revenue for a patient, but I do a hotel style room service program. So you get to order what you want when you want it, and you get it delivered to your room in 45 minutes or less. So we're able to do some creative name changing on the menus there, and also see if there are more vegetables and plant-based foods selected by patients, just simply by doing the changes of the names.
And have you seen an uptick in comfort food since the pandemic?
We have and we haven't, but there's just so many confounding variables in there. We've scaled back a lot of our stations. We've had to reduce staffing in some cases, but I also have unions, so there's sort of a functional limit I can reduce down to. But yeah, people are pretty stressed, and they like the creature comforts. The other thing is that people, they don't want to venture out quite a bit, so we've actually spun up a grocery store at our campuses so people can buy a carton of eggs. For a while there was a big run on flour. I don't know are you guys baking when you're at home? I have 3 kids. We're baking up a storm, so there was a run on flour for a while there, and so we were selling flour and rice. And so anything that makes it a little easier so people don't have to necessarily go take an extra trip out into the community. So we've been able to spin up some new concepts there. The other one we have is we've launched our dining program through Grubhub. So we are now on the Grubhub app. We're using a part called Grubhub Dining, where basically we've geo-fenced the campuses. So when you come to one of our campuses, it'll ask you if you're part of UCSF, and if you are, then you can see my stores on there. You can pre-order and prepay for that. So I think I need to give shorter answers, otherwise I'm not going to get through all these hands.
You're probably answering everybody's or a lot of people's questions with your answer. So thank you, Abigail Elliott.
Hi, I was wondering, how has COVID made sustainability practices harder to promote / use?
Oh, packaging. We're just using truckloads of packaging. It makes us sad. That's probably the hardest thing that we've had to do, is simply, going more self-service. We were already pretty sustainable. We do a lot of composting up here through the city of San Francisco. But the sheer amount of packaging, whether it's compostable or not, has probably been the hardest part. Not so much on the food side.
Patty?
Sorry, I'm having troubles with my microphone today. Hi, Dan. In your experience, is there something that is more often overlooked when it comes to safety and sanitation, and does it usually play like a bigger risk than other things jeopardizing safety?
I think there's probably, people always suck at hand washing, and I came in early, so I heard Michelle talking about some of that. But I think the thing that's overlooked is cleaning and sanitizing quite a bit, and really distinguishing what is the fact that it's a 2-step process, that you do have to weigh, you have to use separate towels and everything. whether or not people check their sanitizer often enough, depending if they do a dunk method, meaning it's an open bucket of sanitizer, or you put a cloth in there, your sanitizer concentration goes down the moment you put a piece of cloth in there, no matter if it's brand new and clean. So whether or not they check it enough over time. And then people are wanting the visual cues right now during things. So we actually put a little disc on every table in our dining rooms. And so we encourage people that when they sit, hopefully they sit down and it's green. And then when they sit down, they turn it to red. And then when they get up from the table to eat, then our team member sort of swoops in and cleans and sanitizes the table and then turns the disc back to red. So we've had to do that a lot more. So I think that's been a very positive thing, that we've been probably a lot better about surface disinfecting than we have in the past. And I think too often I go into restaurants and food establishments, especially pre-pandemic, and it's just one spray bottle, and it's not two. It's a two-step process always.
Thank you.
Larissa.
Yeah, you answered my question a little bit already, but in the sustainability research, what is your role as a sustainability officer and more involved in like the food service and nutrition side? And then what other professions do you intersect with in the research with like data collection and maintenance and evaluation?
So when it comes to sustainability, I'm responsible for it all. So that means, so we're principally focused on water use, energy use intensity, waste diversion, food, and then culture. So those are sort of our pillars that were there. Now, since we're in a hospital, we actually have 14 different waste streams, which is far more than landfill, recycle, and compost. So we've got a lot of other things that we need to be mindful of. A lot of it still is about behavior change. And so just we struggle really to get people to put the right thing in the right receptacle. That's still one. I sort of am very pessimistic about that. I would love to take all of our waste, dump it somewhere, and then have it sorted. If we could do that a little bit better. So I spend a lot of time with our environmental services team looking at how we're going to take out the waste. Some of our buildings are very old. And so we can put 3 receptacles up in some of these units, but it's 15 stories times 2 at one campus. And so if I need to pull the recycling, that's labor. 70% of the cost of healthcare in general is labor, period. Doesn't matter, tertiary, quaternary, community, it's just very, very high. So that's a lot of what we look to do to control cost. Do a lot of work with the facilities team. Again, also an older facility, sometimes you can do things on air ventilation and changes, but a lot of times these buildings are old, and so I can't control how many air changes happen, in a lab, because it's either on or it's off. And in addition to that, there's a lot of extra ventilation requirements in hospitals that colleges and universities don't typically have to deal with. So our goal is to basically say, how are we as a health system moving forward, and how are we doing relative to our competition? How do you know that you're the best? Well, one of the ways is that you benchmark. So we participate in a couple of benchmarking programs, and we start at home. So we start against the other University of California health systems. So when it comes to things like what's our energy use intensity, what's our waste diversion, how much sustainable food do we do? We start first comparing ourselves to the other UCs, and then we compare ourselves to other comparable facilities nationally. So a lot of what I do is sort of facilitating those goals and helping people set goals that are measurable, set goals that are achievable, specific, and then also timely. Sometimes we're doing things in short sprints in 60 days, and sometimes we're doing things over the long haul because it takes capital investment to make a situation better, like installing photovoltaic cells. One of the challenges in California hospitals is we have these things called earthquakes. You may have heard of them. And so we actually have a state entity in California called OSHPOD, Occupational Safety, Health, and Planning Division, where basically we've got to show how anything more than about 20 pounds is bolted to the counter, the floor, the wall, the ceiling, so that in the event of an earthquake, it doesn't move and cause other damage or harm to people. And so what it does is it triples the cost at a minimum, also triples the amount of time it takes to get stuff done. So that hospital that we opened a few years ago, it took 10 years. It would probably take about 5 in most other parts of the country. It takes us 10 because of all the extra rules and regulations. And our budget doesn't go as far because of all that extra time and effort that we have to do.
Oh my goodness. So what about like a 25-pound bag of carrots? Does that have to be?
No, no, don't. Now you're being ridiculous.
That sounds amazing.
And it's on the floor in a bin anyway, so it's not going to fall on somebody.
This sounds like a second job, Dan.
Kind of is.
Oh my goodness. David R.
So, what would you say is one of the biggest, I guess you could say, challenges when it comes to implementing a new food safety policy or program, maybe something new, some new policy that's occurred due to the current pandemic or status that we're in on such a large scale? What would you say is the biggest challenge when it comes to implementing that across all the other or hospitals?
I think probably just the amount of the standardizing and then the training time. We haven't really had to do anything major, but we've had to do it really quickly. So when we're dealing with things, my hospital had some of the first COVID-19 cases in the entire country. We got some of the first cases off the cruise ships. So we were dealing with this in early February and really starting to think through how we were going to do some of this. So when it came to things like, getting rid of self-service or physically distancing our dining rooms, we had to do it in a standardized and thoughtful way. And in some cases, we had to do some elements after the fact. So for example, we put our tables 6 feet apart, but then people would start pushing the tables together. So we end up doing visual cues to say, nope, this is the sticker that denotes where the table should be, and here's the sticker on the floor where the chair should be, and then we had to do that across 3 campuses. So getting that done and really not understanding the humans, which are the factor you can't control. You would think, hey, the tables are nice and far apart, so why are y'all going to push them together during a pandemic? But they did. So and it was amazing. You put a couple of stickers on the floor to show where it should be. It would be there. The other thing is just the change over time. So we were able to stay open because we were in the hospital, whereas other restaurants and things changed and closed down. And so we actually had to do a lot on food safety because we wanted people to feel safe coming back. And it wasn't maybe the people who worked here, but for a long time, we didn't have hardly any visitors that were allowed in the hospital. And we still have a challenge of people feeling comfortable getting their care in a hospital. I don't think it's so much fear of us as an institution. I think it's just, fear overall of what's going on. And so we needed, as people were able to go dine in the community, even if it was just outdoors, how do we give them that feeling of comfort, and security? So again, doing things like the distancing, but also that little indicator I talked about on the tables. Again, go to the green ones. The green ones are nice and clean and sanitized. That went a long way.
Ashley Gardoni.
Hi. So I had a question about like the floor plan setup of the at UCSF. So I was just wondering, like, how do you feel like the setup of like the floor plan, whether it be like the cafe or the cafeteria preparing like patient meals, like works for the needs of the hospital? Like how effective like the floor plan is, and if there's anything you would change, basically, if you could.
Interesting question. So the cafe is phenomenal. I say that tongue in cheek because I redesigned it. So if there's any problems with it, that's all on me. I think our bigger challenge has been in the kitchen. I have a 1958 era kitchen at the Parnassus campus. And we've had to really sort of stretch and do some things. There are some things that, for example, tile floors. If you have built-in equipment in tile floors and all of a sudden you start pulling up pieces of equipment, then you usually get lots and lots of problems with the floor. So sometimes you don't do certain things to avoid other problems. So we actually built, for example, a really long conveyor belt between our cook line and the main kitchen to a set of dumbwaiters. So I mentioned our main campus is 2 15-story towers. We have 4 service elevators, 2 in one tower and 2 in the other. The problem is 2 in one tower are outside the kitchen, so we can't even use them. So we actually have a set of dumbwaiters. So it was very important for us to get our meals to those dumbwaiters as fast as possible so they can get up and get there within 45 minutes or less. I actually probably have the most fun on really looking at logistics and flow, queuing theory, et cetera, to really maximize our facilities. And so I would strongly encourage you guys to take a look at some of those types of things, because there's a lot of opportunity in being a food service consultant. There's also a lot of opportunity in just being better in many kinds of operations. If you understand queuing, logistics, as well as human behavior and how do they react to signage and other things to sort of get them to where they need to be. I do a lot with actually internal wayfinding in the organization as well. That's actually a huge problem. So that there's, the overall flow is fine. We make it work because that's sort of the budget that we have, and we have no choice in the matter. But it's fun when you get to redo it.
And do you have any recommendations of how they would learn more about those kind of things?
I would think if there's any opportunities to, you know, if you work at a place that, you know, needs to do a remodel, I'd be raising my hand. We always have these kinds of projects, at least in our organization, because I'm always sort of like, well, what if we did this, and how would this work? And so I usually tease my team a lot, but then I'm like, let's put pen to paper. Let's figure this out a little bit. But then let's have a sharp goal in mind. So we're not changing for the sake of changing. We're changing to, you know, increase sales, to get better throughput, whatever the case may be. So it's usually something that's acquired over time in my experience. It's not usually an entry-level thing for most people.
Awesome. Cece?
I was wondering about just kind of like your protocol for feeding patients who are in isolation right now, and like the extra food safety steps that you have to take, and if it's been difficult or not.
So you might find this hard to believe, but I don't take any different food safety steps for patients in isolation. Why? Because the food safety program that we already have is, I think, one of the better ones in the country. I've got data coming out my ears. I've got some slides later on if we have time that can show you some of that. What we've done differently is that when it comes to an infection risk, for patients that are on highly contagious protocols, you know, there's various forms of isolation protocol. We actually never pass those trays anyway. So our trays come up on the same china, silverware, plates, bowls, etc., that they would under any, for any patient. The difference is we don't go in. So to COVID positive or suspected positive rooms, they actually doff and don, as we say, take off personal protective equipment, usually surgical masks. Sometimes it's a PAPR, which is basically like a big hood that goes over the top, usually a disposable gown, and then of course gloves. And they go in and they pass the tray. Usually a patient care assistant or a nurse are the ones who actually go in and pass the tray. They're also the ones who pick it up. Now, they take that same tray and they put it on a dirty meal cart on the floor. And then when my people come down, we're using what we call universal precautions. So you could have anything on that tray, but our team members are still using the same personal protective equipment that they used before, because they could have come from an isolation room, say, pre-pandemic. And then we make sure a dish machine is at the proper final rinse temperature, and we make sure that people are using the PPE, and we're making sure that things are drying. So we haven't actually had to change that. Believe it or not, this has actually been a huge source of conflict in the healthcare industry. I have colleagues that are putting everything on disposables for patients. I think it's ridiculous. I understand why, but it's really not grounded in the science of food safety, and it's not what's also grounded in risk. So one of the interesting things I think is not talked about a lot in food safety is this perception of risk. So why don't you wash your hands? Well, I don't think I'm going to get sick because I don't wash my hands. And that sort of rationalizes, you know, not taking the time and doing other things. Same thing, think about that like this. You got a busy street. Do you go out and do you run across the street with cars coming, or do you wait for the light? And mentally, it's sort of the same way when you look at why people do or do not do things. I look at it and say, what's the science tell me on transmission risk and other things, and what is the risk of cross-contamination by the methods that we're doing that? And some people are so risk adverse, they think it's better to put everything on disposals. Well, guess what? If I put everything on disposals, my food temperatures are gonna suck. My food is gonna be cold when it gets there because I'm in a clamshell like it was a to-go thing, as opposed to being under a dome with a nice heated base. And so we've fought very hard to make sure that our infection control team, we're in conjunction with them in terms of what are we going to do from a food program. And they actually come and inspect us on a monthly basis. So the hospital infection, epidemiology, infection prevention people come see our facilities. They know what we do, they know what we don't do. And so it's not a hard sell, but there's lots of people in the country that are serving COVID patients meals on disposables because of this assessment of risk, which again, that's their assessment, that's fine. Our assessment, based on strong voice from nutrition and food services to our people, to our infectious disease physicians, as well as our epidemiologists, is we serve everything on standard silverware in China using standard precautions, and we're good. And we haven't had an outbreak due to food, and we've been doing this since March or February. So.
And how's the buy-in with the staff with that protocol?
Again, we didn't have to change anything. We wouldn't be passing trays because these patients are on airborne precautions. We didn't pass on airborne precautions before. We're not passing on airborne precautions now. So there was really no change. The nurses are annoyed, but I can understand that. We did change some things so that we went, for a while there, we were concentrating COVID patients on a particular unit. And in that case, we actually were passing them all their lunches at once and all their breakfasts at lunch and all their dinners at once. Before, for everybody else, we were letting them order what they want when they want it. We were getting up there in 45 minutes or less. But because of the PPE, because we were really, PPE is still not in huge supply in the United States, no matter what anyone says. We're fighting every day to make sure that we have it. We're good. We actually have a running inventory on how many days supply we have on hand of everything. But for a while there, it was really touch and go. And so we were sending them all the breakfast at lunch so they didn't have to put on and take off so much PPE as sort of a conservation method and not so much a patient satisfaction approach. But our team hasn't had to make any changes really.
Testament to food safety. Sophie?
Hi, thank you for joining us today. My question is, in what ways do you ensure all employees follow food safety regulations?
So, day one, they walk in the door, training. Day two, training. Day three, training. After that, we've built a pretty robust food safety program that has very few opportunities to what we call dry lab. Just write something on a piece of paper and pretend that it's all good. We've invested copiously, and I got some slides on this, on automated temperature monitoring systems. I'm literally in the process of changing from one automated temperature monitoring system to another one. But I've been doing it for more than 10 years and was one of the leaders in the organization putting it in. We have a computerized system where we take food temperatures. Again, it's this item, the probe goes in, connects via Bluetooth. It's either right or it's not. And if it's wrong, you can't change it. So we've done that a lot with automating that. Our supervisors have a lot of checks that they need to do. Most of the things are digital, even if we're just digitizing a paper form. And I get reports on a regular basis. So if I don't like what I see, then that's a problem. I think the other part too, though, is again, you want to make sure that you're doing things for the right reasons. Sure, you want the food to be safe, but in some cases, it's not even about safety. So let's take my favorite example. What does 150-degree soup taste like? Anyone is on mute. What does 150-degree soup taste like? Is it piping hot? No, it's lukewarm. 150-degree soup tastes lukewarm. Is it safe? Absolutely. It's over, again, take a pre-made one. So it's above 135 degrees Fahrenheit. It's safe, but it's not to quality standards. So in some cases, our temperatures in the kitchen are actually to quality standards. That's what I'm assessing on. I want my soups to be, my cream-based ones to be 180. I want my broth-based ones to be 190. Because by the time it gets to the customer, my patients, it needs to be more in the range of 160, 170 degrees to taste hot. So that's what our focus is. We actually have all of our food safety standards in the kitchen, whether it's made to order or made in bulk, higher than 135, because we want it to be hot at the point of service. And then we actually participate in a third-party satisfaction tool, and they ask 3 questions about food. How was the quality? How was the temperature? And how was the courtesy of the person who served it for you? And they send this survey to literally every single person who comes to the hospital. And so we track those scores religiously over time and share them back with the team. And then we can slice and dice them by, say, patient care unit, like the 15th floor versus the 6th floor, and see if there's different trends and stuff like that. So in our case, we want to do it for the right reasons to make sure that it's to the customer's expectation, which usually exceeds the food safety standard.
So thank you, Dan, for bringing that up. I mean, Dan has such he's another complex issue, right? So he's maintaining or getting everything to temp, but then he's also considering how long it takes, right? So he's thinking about the 6th floor, the 12th floor, and how long food takes to get there and what the temp will be. So it adds a whole other complexity. So thanks, Dan, for bringing that up. You said you had, do you feel like you want to pause now?
I can show you guys a few cool things, and then we can. I want to be cognizant of your time. So
well, we're cognizant of your time. We appreciate this. This is awesome information.
I always hate how Zoom covers up certain things. Okay, so does everybody know what HACCP stands for? Mm-hmm. Or what is HACCP? Let me ask a better question. What is HACCP? Please don't define it for me. I'm sure you can all define it. You're getting ready to take CertSafe soon?
Yeah, we've just covered it the last 2 weeks.
Okay, so tell me what HACCP is, but don't define it for me. Or define it and explain it. Most people can define it, they can't explain it.
You guys don't need to be shy.
Everybody can come off mute.
HACCP is the hazard analysis of critical control points, I think.
So hazard analysis critical control point, but what is it? How does it inform what we do in food safety?
It's kind of identifying steps and processes along the way upon where the highest exposure or the most important step you can take to increase food safety. So like cooking steps and how what needs to be done at those steps to make sure that the food is processed safely.
So is every step a critical control point? So let's break it apart. The first part is hazard analysis. So we talk about that idea. We're walking across the street. Do I do it or do I not do it? So basically what we're doing is we're analyzing for hazards, physical, chemical, and biological at each step in the process. So when we receive the food, what are the hazards? When we store the food, what are the hazards? And then what are the control measures? In some cases we have control measures, like we keep the refrigerators at 41 degrees or less. We make sure the freezer is running so the food is frozen, etc. But we're differentiating between those that are critical and those that are non-critical. What's the definition of a critical control point? So it's the last step where you can basically kill, to keep it in very, very simple terms. So if I get a chicken breast in and it's raw, and it's frozen, so I make sure that it's received frozen. That's a control point. Make sure it's stored frozen. That's a control point. I make sure it's maybe thawed. That's a control point. I make sure that maybe it's breaded and done whatever. That's still a control point. But when I cook it, that is a kill step. That is where we can actually apply a process to basically reduce the hazard to a safe and acceptable level. And so cooking is what in fact does that. And then sometimes we have to do other things like hold it, which is also a critical control point, to make sure that that first step that we did, we don't do things that disrupts that. So we're basically looking at that. And so the systems that you put in place, some of them are about control points and some of them are about critical control points. In fast terms, cooking, cooling, reheating are basically your major critical control points, right? Because we're doing active things to control the risk of hazards there. I've actually developed a model for this with some past work. One of those $500,000 grants I got when I was at Iowa State was actually doing HACCP in 40 schools across the state of Iowa. I was in a group called the Cooperative Extension. If you haven't heard of Cooperative Extension, it existed at pretty much every single land-grant university in the country. So my role was a state specialist. So we were looking at how do we build teams that are going to do and define critical control points and then the corresponding critical limits. So a control point is cooking. A control limit is cooking to 30 to 165 degrees Fahrenheit or greater for at least 15 seconds. So that's what's called the critical limit. And then we do other things in terms of have corrective actions and record keeping and then just verification of our processes. But all of that is built on what we call administrative or management commitment. And in some cases, we have these foundational things, which are usually control points or corrective action steps. But like temperature monitoring, for example, not all temperature monitoring goes to a CCP, but some does. Some of these are done within the organization typically. Some of these are maybe a blend of things. You have people coming in to make sure that the things are cooking properly or cooling properly. And then oftentimes you have external ones, and integrated pest management. No food service operator that I know does their own integrated pest management. That's always external. In some cases, not. So how do we do that? Well, we basically have a series of indicators that we've put together for our food safety system to make sure that we get inspected by a number of entities. So we get inspected by the local health authority, infection control. We get a compliance inspection from our regulatory entity in preparation for inspections. We actually have a hand hygiene monitoring program. We are part of the organization does what we call a secret shopper model. And they basically go up there and they basically see are people washing their hands when they're doing it. Ironically, a healthcare definition of hand washing is not the food definition of hand washing. The healthcare version of hand washing is actually using sanitizer. And we actually sanitize our hands between every single patient room when we're passing trays under normal circumstances. Cooling is pretty straightforward. Again, you look at my log forms, and this one actually is still a paper form, but you can see explicitly how we did either single or double stage cooling, and we did it within 6 hours. It is unequivocal that we got down fast enough if we're doing 2-stage cooling, within 2 hours or less, and then got the rest of the way to 41. Every single regulator who walks in my place can see that. Cold food holding, that's done typically with a tablet and a Bluetooth thermometer. Same thing for hot holding, I should say both. And then sanitation inspections, those are, again, we get from internal entities as well as external ones. And then I've got 200 plus assets that are on an automated temperature monitoring system. And we're collecting the corrective actions in each one of these. A lot of there's no part of the food service industry that's probably more inspected than healthcare. We get all of these different inspections, CMS, Joint Commission, local health authority, and the food service management are the key people to guide those. So, and we get inspections all of the time. And that's just something that's unique to us more than any part of the food service industry. I won't bore you with some of that. The traditional scope of, at least in hospitals, is we used to just talk about kitchens and retail food and all of that, and now we have food everywhere. In fact, the new hospital we're designing is going to have bodegas and little food nooks and pantries and other things. And then we do other things. We do breast milk fortification. We take human milk fortifier and we mix that up and we add that and we help store that. We actually do that for donor breast milk as well as express breast milk. Supportive breastfeeding is a very important thing that most dietitians are doing. It's the best for the baby. And so we do that in our own hospitals, and we also manage the program overall. We used to think of food systems as really simply, conventional, cook, chill, and all that. And that's so not true anymore. Now we've got hotel style programs and hotlines and hybrids and bulk and not bulk, and it does all of that. Big thing for us is, again, how do we make it better and faster? So the rapid synthesis of data is a skill that will serve you well in your career, no matter what you end up doing. We're trying to find computer web-based training for as much as we can, and then also electronically monitoring and using even things like data loggers for substantive transport. I used to send food from my main campus to Mount Zion on a regular basis, and that's not true anymore. We look at other things like RFID food vending. So basically, if you go tap your badge on this little thing here, or you swipe your credit card, the door opens after it authorizes your account, and then you you pull out what you want, and then it charges your card automatically. And it knows exactly what you took because we've tagged everything. And so we are trying to make sure that if this unit, which is leased from an outside vendor, does have an auto shut off if the unit goes above 41 degrees Fahrenheit, and in our case, for more than 4 consecutive hours. Why 4 consecutive hours?
Hi, guys.
Come
Where's your
on.
experts?
TDZ.
That's outlined in the hazard analysis critical control points like of serve safe that it needs to be less than 4 hours and can't enter the danger zone.
Yep. So temperature, danger zone. So we were basically, we hit that 4-hour limit, boom, we're locked out. Nobody can actually buy any food there, but making sure that we've done that. We're looking at robots to minimize that. So this is the one fun thing that I have. Hopefully you guys will be able to hear and see some of this.
I think when you share, you gotta share sound too. Yeah, Dan, we're not getting any sound. I think you gotta share sound at the same time when you're sharing. Not that you can hear me either.
All right, well, I believe you guys can't hear it, so at least you were able to see it. And then you can go on your own. I've just dropped it into the chat for you. You can hear the narration and all that sort of thing. We have 33 robots that run around our Mission Bay campus. I actually oversee all 33 of them. I don't have to do a whole lot on a daily basis. We have 6 of them that are devoted to nutrition and food services by day. Apple, pear, banana, blueberry, and grape. Those are their names. We actually, they basically do the heavy lifting. They take the trays from the kitchen to the floor. They bring the dirty trays back. We have it so that it can literally, it takes the cart and it picks it up and sort of lifts it and then carries it as you saw. There were some other models on there with the ones with the drawers. Those are for pharmacy, and those are one piece, and so they don't have 2 separate pieces. So the ones with 2 pieces, we can drop it outside the dish room, and then we take the cart into the dish room and we break it down, and the robot just goes into the kitchen. It doesn't go into a dirty space ever. And then it can come and take the next load, and it just keeps going and going and going all the time, every day. And like I said, it calls the elevators. And so our robot fleet goes about 150 miles a day for the organization. It's quite a lot. It's a 1 million square foot complex, and so the robots can run the whole length of it, but they do some of the really mundane tasks. I always say, what's the satisfaction on pushing a cart from A to B? Plus there's injury risk and other things. So we do some of that with the food carts. And then at night, we actually are able to share our carts. And so our linen team actually gets our robots, and we're able to, they're able to use them so they don't have to pay anyone. So that's pretty cool thing. Some other cool things we've done a bedside and meal ordering program. So kind of imagine this for Uber Eats or Grubhub. I mentioned that we went to Grubhub, but the difference is I know that Michelle is on a heart healthy diet. I know that she prefers She dislikes or is allergic to tomatoes, and she prefers to speak in Spanish. And I give her a menu that is 100% compliant with her diet order at that moment in time. And then when she orders, it comes back to her, and she can see the the Italian squash here. It has 43 calories, and when she orders at the end, it says, this is the total calories of your menu. We've put icons on there for SS is our smart choice. So our smart choice side item, we have a vegan, vegetarian, etc. Different icons here, and we've put this all into an interactive system. And then again, we know this is about her. We know this particular patient's on a regular diet at the precise moment in time. So that's what we have to do: right tray, right person, right time. Because sometimes people are not allowed to eat, and we have to be able to make sure that our systems catch that, as well as not provide them food that they could possibly be allergic to. And we know all of this through an integration through our electronic health record. We know the person, we know the place, we know their preferred language of communication. My menu is translated into 8 additional languages besides English. And then it keys off of the preferred language of communication from the electronic health record to present to people the menu in that order. But we can also show them a menu. We can flip back to English really easily in manual. They can also watch TV and streaming services on the tablets and everything that are built into the room. So again, just kind of in summary, we were talking about, how do we make sure that things are safe? Again, it is about systems. We need to make sure that everything has, checks and balances, so the local health authority, can come in and do what they need to do, no matter which place that we're doing that. This is a lot of lingo here, but you think you guys are into food safety and serve safe, you come work in a hospital. And we're going to start talking about, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus and other types of things here. So actually, I actually represent my department on the infection control committee as well. So our role in reducing hospital-acquired infections, I've been through norovirus outbreaks. They are not fun. We did have to change our processes for norovirus, but we have not had to change our processes for COVID. The thing to note on our norovirus outbreak, it was limited to a hematology oncology unit. That should sound somewhat familiar in the sense that what are our most at-risk populations for foodborne illness and immune compromise would be those on, a hematology oncology unit. The interesting thing is, when are people sick? And so you hear this a lot when you talk about COVID. If we know when you're COVID positive, we actually back up 2 days and then we start doing contact tracing from there. And the same is true for there. We're doing about 237 temperature assets. You were talking about systems earlier. We can see we have a lot of little excursions. Be careful what you wish for when you get automated temperatures, as opposed to checking a refrigerator or freezer 1 time a day. But overall, we have a very high rate, which things are in the required upper and lower control limits to keep our food, in fact, safe. So we have diagrams that look like this. So this is the average here, the little red bar, and then the highest part that they went out of range versus the lowest one. So do you think this is a good running unit or not? This top one here. It's a freezer, can't tell.
A little inconsistent.
So the answer is yes. It's a really well-run unit because the average temperature is somewhere around, so the average temperature is 2.72 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that's pretty darn good, close to 0. So I can say with a high degree of confidence this food is in fact frozen. But the interesting thing is, when you're monitoring things all the time, you really see the good, bad, and the ugly. So freezers go through defrost cycles, and that's why these tails happen. So the question is, can you get the alarms to not fire off because you're just going through a routine defrost cycle. We actually do other things where what's most important, is it the temperature of the refrigerator or the freezer, or is it the temperature of the food? So the short answer is it's the temperature of the food. So what we do is we actually put things into our sensors into a buffer solution of about 200 mLs of silica glass beads. And so why is that important? Because it simulates the internal temperature of the food, as opposed to it just being the ambient temperature. So the ambient temperature can be deceptive. It can also be suspect of very high and low temperature swings, be just from ambient air. Where if it's buffered it's really simulating the internal temperature. Again, you learn in ServSafe, putting that probe in the middle of the food to get the core temperature of it. This sort of does basically the same thing. So we can't assume that the ambient temperature and the internal food temperature are different. There's a lot of opportunity for some great studies on this. And we've actually played around a lot with where we want those sensors to be placed in terms of the warm unit. The other thing we look at when it comes to food safety is there's probably a lot of pressure to buy local. Well, how safe is that food? And particularly when I'm serving to at-risk people. Again, I've got the sickest of the sick. I've got pregnant, and I've got elderly. I've got very young children, and I've got immune compromised. So we actually work with an aggregator to look at where our food comes from. And so we're trying to get most everything in the yellow because there's San Francisco right there. And so we have in-house polymerase chain reaction testing in the aggregator warehouse. So they get all of the produce from these yellow counties, and then they bring it in and they do PCR testing. And you probably heard about PCR because PCR is the most reliable COVID-19 testing as well. And so we've been partnering with them for a long time. So it's great. We want to support the local economy, but we need to make sure it's safe. We talk about other things in terms of risk. One of the issues we're talking about is corrugated cardboard. And if you don't know what corrugated cardboard is, it's the type that's got those holes in there. Some people think that that's at high risk for pests, and you probably saw something to that effect in the ServSafe book. However, if you're turning the cardboard over, you have higher degree of inventory turns, your risk isn't quite there. We have people who are literally taking all corrugated cardboard out of hospitals all across this country because of a perceived risk. So one of my take homes for you today is it really safe or is it really not? And what's the proof of that, or is it personal perception? Sanitizer guidelines, I think, are confusing. You know, a lot of things we're looking at wipes, and we get into things, not only what's the concentration, but remember there's always what we call a dwell time, meaning there's a minimum amount of time that sanitizer needs to be in contact with surfaces to be effective. And in some cases, particularly with wipes, it's usually around a minute. So it's not enough to wipe the surface. It actually has to be wiped and stay on that surface for a period of time in order to be most effective, to have that kill that we're trying to achieve on countertop surfaces. Expiration dates are another ones that are interesting. We're actually expected to have expiration dates on our test strips. So the strips that we use to test the sanitizer concentration, are they effective or not? And now we see expiration dates pushed on those, not just on food, on sanitizer strips. I'll skip this one here. Some best practices, again, looking at evidence base, making sure that food safety is a part of your culture. I've done a fair amount of research on food safety culture, so I think that's sort of how we make sure that everybody knows from the moment they walk in the door in our unit that food safety is important. So they either get, the managers and supervisors get a ServSafe or equivalent certification, and then we expect our food handler certification for all of our cooks and some of our key food service staff. And then being part of it, you know, again, you need to be the driver in your facility. You need to be the food safety expert. And so we want our team to have a mandatory refresh as well. And we do that online so that people can in fact keep current with all of the best practices. We want to ingratiate food safety in our annual evaluations. We want to get it down to the fact, I know that Michelle washes her hands on a regular basis, and I want to comment about that in her performance evaluation if I can. We're not quite there yet, but we are trying to aspirationally get there. So, you know, in closing, just again, how are we different than some of the other food service? You know, and I would lump not only hospitals, but that also goes for nursing homes, acute care, assisted living, et cetera. You know, the customers are far more sick than they used to be. We have to be on top of our game. You should, you know, make yourself available if there's an opportunity for you to reach out and help out in those homes. There's lots of things to be learned. Sounds like you were talking about some of that before I came on. And then lastly, if there's anything I can do to help you guys, please let me know. And that's the end of my dog and pony show.
That's awesome. You touched on a lot of other things that I think were, you know, beyond what we normally think of as a role of both dietitian and a food service director. We have about 10 more minutes. Dan, can we ask a few more questions? Sure. Awesome. Janelle, you want to go for it?
Yeah. So I know you touched on trying to lower your food-related carbon emissions, and I was wondering if all of your staff is as excited and motivated to do that as you, or if it was kind of a process to get everyone invested in that, because I feel like it's kind of a new topic, and I feel like younger generations are maybe more passionate and aware, and I was just wondering if everyone that you work with is as excited to try and do that or not.
I think my management team is genuinely excited to do that. I think that the challenge for us is, and Michelle probably knows this better than I, many college university dining budgets are sort of fixed. They're based on projected revenues and they're kind of like locked in. My budgets actually go up and down based on volume, and we run them as P&Ls or profit and loss statements. So we actually have some obligations to hit certain sales goals. And if I don't hit those sales goals, as I'm kind of not right now, because they forecasted my volumes based on last year without a pandemic as opposed to right now, I'm expected to flex down. So use less people, use less hours, and that's always a challenge. So what's that balance between generating a sale and being plant forward? And that's just sort of an ongoing thing. I still think you lead with flavor. You lead with visuals as much as humanly possible. You want to give people something that they can't get other places. And so while I do have competitors across the street with a Panda, a Jamba, a Subway, and a couple of other vendors, they help keep me honest. If you want Jamba, go ahead, walk across the street. It's a nice fresh fruit, but highly caloric, smoothie that you can get over there, but you can get that over there. I'm not going to sell it to you, but I'm going to get you something. I'm going to get you pho. I'm going to get you something that's a little bit unique and different. We did a really nice African bowl yesterday that I know nobody else on campus is selling. And so we're trying to sort of strike that fine line. In some cases, people don't miss it. So if I take meatloaf off the menu, I don't think people in the end are going to miss it as long as I replace it with something they perceive as just as good.
Rose, do you have a question?
Thank you.
Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your knowledge and expertise. I saw on your LinkedIn account that you've conducted research with restaurant workers and analyzing their hand hygiene. And I was curious about what you found in your research and how you conducted that research.
So I brought $500,000 with me to UCSF. So in my day job, I had to do this research project on the side. And I had to go recruit people as I got it when I was at the University of Houston. So what we found was, when we first just back up and say, well, how do we do this? So we went in and we did a very thorough assessment of each restaurant's program. We kind of wanted to really set up what baseline was in many ways. What were their standard food safety practices? We did some observations in the restaurant. We didn't really tell the employees what we were there to do, but we did. They sometimes they figured it out, and it just sort of worked out. And we tried to pick a variety of restaurants, independents, chains, small, large, et cetera. And then a colleague did some in Lubbock, Texas, as well as a point of comparison. So we had a really nice baseline. We did some swabbing in the facility. So actually, I took did microbiological testing in the facility. And then we put together a program that would help people change. The other thing that was really cool that we did is we secretly put counters in the hand soap dispensers. So if you would humor me for a moment, generally speaking, if you ask a food service operator, how do you know your employees are washing their hands? What are they going to tell you? For those of you who worked in any food service operation, how do you know the answer to that question? You really don't. So our hypothesis was, what if we got maybe a really, really close surrogate for hand washing? And so if we said that every time there was a pump, that was equal to a hand wash for the most part. And our counter, was literally a digital counter, was sophisticated enough so if I double pumped, as a lot of times people do, it still registered it as 1. So we went in and tracked the what we call the WIN numbers, the wash index numbers, for a couple of months. And then we shared with the owner what the numbers were. We came in and we did some training, and we secretly monitored the wash index numbers some more. And then we started having them post what the wash index numbers were in the restaurant. So the idea that there's actually data actually did stimulate and raise our wash index numbers up on average overall, and they were statistically significant changes. So unfortunately, this counting system is not ubiquitous in the marketplace. It's kind of expensive. And it really gets tied up into a lot of other things. We selected, everybody's used Purell hand sanitizer. We actually use a counter from their parent company called Gojo Industries at the time. But Gojo is not the market leader in soap and supply in the food service industry. So it was kind of a pain in the butt to get the counters in there. And then the counters, you had to pop them open, and then the restaurant had to manually report them and all that. And so the wash index number was the number of washes per hour worked. And so our goal was to measure the wash index number, set a baseline as to what we thought the wash index number should be, and then work for the restaurants to see them get there. So it was a fun project. I didn't get the chance to do as much field work as I wanted. I had to hire somebody to do that. But overall, it was pretty successful. And it just goes to show, if you show people what you're doing, or more importantly, how they are doing as people, you can in fact move the needle. And we've got to find ways to do that for hand washing. And so we've kind of stumbled upon one way that we possibly could do it in the future. Ecolab has one, but they put their counter like right in front, and it's only, and every pump equals a wash, and it doesn't work very well. And they're sort of out of vogue right now, but it was a fun project.
That sounds like an awesome project. How long do you think the behavioral change lasts after training with hand washing?
Oh, it's been a while. I'd have to go look, but it was a 2-year project. So we went in and did it. We had enough time to kind of look at things in phases. So I don't know. But, again, that goes really back to management. But it also goes back to risk and to practices. So one of the most eye-opening ones is we had a really popular vegetarian restaurant that was part of our study. And they just had dynamite food safety practices overall. They had excellent food safety culture. So they didn't really improve hardly at all over time because they already started at a great point. So that's sort of the other thing, the importance of understanding where baseline is when you're trying to make changes on anything relative to the goal that you want to achieve.
And thank you so much for your time. In sort of closing thoughts, any last piece of advice for our budding dietitians and foodies in the course?
Everybody's got to eat. So everybody's got an opinion about what we do for a living. I'm sure y'all do. That's a lot of job security in that in some cases, particularly if you work for larger institutions. And that's sort of what my career has been. I purposely have picked larger places, got some job security around it, but I have a lot of fun. I hope my passion comes through in how I talk about what I'm doing, and just doing so many more other cool things. And I think part of it is finding a right fit. And I think UCSS has been a great one. For me, I think I've made pretty good choices all the way along. And I would say, just be ready for what's next. I believe that your generation will change careers so many more times than I have in my generation. And so if I told you if you asked me when I was in your position a long time ago, what I would have done a fraction. Would I be living in California? No. I mean, Texas? No. Pennsylvania? No. Would I've done a fraction of the things I had? I could not have imagined that. But I believe I helped train myself for what was next. And so my fondest hope, and I say this to our dietetic interns, I'm accredited 10-person dietetic internship, is be ready for what's next. And be very open. Don't try to go in thinking I'm absolutely going to do this with my career, because you'll never know where life takes you. And so that great examples. One of my best ones is I had a dietitian who was really enthusiastic. She was a former basketball player, and she worked for me as a procurement manager. And she wanted to go work for a tech startup out here in Silicon Valley. And she's like, should I go do it? I'm like, absolutely. She's like, why would you encourage me to leave you? And I'm like, because you probably are going to look back and say, you wish you would have done that. And so she went and did it. And the company went under. but now she's the performance dietitian for Stanford Dining. And if I hadn't set her free and encouraged her to go do that, she wouldn't have ever have tried, and she wouldn't be at Stanford. She's very happy there. And so just be ready for what's next. My fondest hope is that you're tied to the profession in some way. You may not be doing like a traditional role, but you're tied somewhere to the profession. So with that, you know, again, I'm on LinkedIn. If you guys want to DM me, that's fine. Happy to entertain other questions and that sort of thing. You can see some of the videos and some of the other projects and stuff that we've done. And I wish you all the best of luck.
Awesome. Yeah, and guys, as he mentioned, there's 10 internship slots there at the CSF. So thank you so much for your time. This was wonderful breadth of information, and we all really appreciate your time, Dan. Thank you.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you, John.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.